Hello, Mage fans, and welcome to Mage the podcast that works hard towards ascension so you don't have to. I'm your host, Adam Simpson. I'm joined by co-host Terry Robinson, and you don't have to be Dr. Dolittle to talk to the animals. We're going to hear from the hairy little guys today on Tomes of Magic. But before we do, Terry, are there any announcements?
I think the only one is that thank you for everyone's support through our Patreon. We've officially hit the point where I have to fill out tax documentation. That's not a very high hurdle to clear, but it's a hurdle, and more than anything, I felt like I made it. Kind of like when a friend of mine got her citizenship and then got and promptly ignored her first summons for jury duty. I ultimately convinced the person in question to go, but still, it's one of those things where it's like, I've made it. I've truly made it. So thank you to everyone who's made that possible, and I look forward to being in prison for the 2024 recording year because I've accidentally committed tax fraud. That's all for me. How about you, Adam?
Yeah, the 2 times I was summoned for jury duty, I actually showed up and then promptly wished that I hadn't. So it's hard to feel too guilty for that.
I get summoned pretty well every year. My favorite jury duty summons was, they said, Mr. Robinson, is there anything that you feel would, bias you in a case regarding medical malpractice and chiropractic? And I'm like, in that I consider chiropractic medical malpractice, possibly. And they're like, thank you, Mr. Robinson, you have not been selected. So
I didn't even get to the questions. I went down to the courthouse both times. I stood in this big room full of people, and one guy walked in and says, everybody here, go home, you're done.
Yeah.
Both times. It's like, well, then why did you call me?
Yeah.
Anyways, we're getting off topic here. Today on Tomes of Magic, we are going to look at the Bygone Bestiary. This came out in 1998. There were 7 authors with additional material by 8 more people. It clocks in at 125 pages. Now, this has the cover and stating that it is a World of Darkness book, which is meant to link in with some or all of the World of Darkness games, such as Magetheascension and Sorcerer's Crusade. I chose this book because it says on the back, suitable for Mage the Sorcerer's Crusade is the first listing, Magetheascension, the second listing, and then it lists 2 other World of Darkness games. So in the writing of this book, they did make it pretty clear that they had Sorcerer's Crusade on the brain as they were writing it. So I'm happy to link it in now that we're walking through the Sorcerer's Crusade books. And speaking of walking through a book, Terry, can you kick us off?
I would be glad to. The opening fiction involves somebody experiencing a unicorn. They find a unicorn, they try and save the unicorn, they return the unicorn to a castle, and then they have a unicorn-shaped hole in their heart until the magic rises. And then it's a unicorn-shaped hole in her heart that seems to be glowing around the end, which implies that they should see a Kosian or possibly one of the more progressive verbena, because if you don't get that taken care of, it'll kill you right quick. I had really no other comments on the opening fiction. The one thing that kind of occurs to me is people talk about in Sorcerer's Crusade, like, magic is dying from the world. People are encroaching on the hidden places. And then I remember a fair amount of that is due to the fact that the population of Europe is finally recovering from the plague. So I kind of want to see a game supplement where it's like, all the mortals are gone. Hey guys, let's party! And suddenly, like, a Lamassu and a unicorn and a Pegasus come out of it and like throw a whipping rager or something like that. But yeah, maybe it's good that Little Magic kind of died. What did you think about the opening fiction, if anything?
Oh, I can't imagine a situation where 2 mages are talking at that time period and one says, the magic is dying. Yeah, it's better than your whole family dying.
Yeah. When I was getting started in this gig. Yeah.
Yeah, this prelude story is based in the timeline of Sorcerer's Crusade and in Europe, where Sorcerer's Crusade mainly focuses. And so I thought that was kind of interesting reading it. It's like, oh, we're kicking off some prelude fiction. It's like, yeah, well, here we are in Sorcerer's Crusade. Sounds good to me. 2 young women are dealing with bygones, and that's what the book is about. So what about that intro?
The introduction tells us that mythic beasts are created to make adventures more interesting. Are they all fake? No. This extends the long World of Darkness tradition, and especially the mage tradition, with a book opening up by telling you you're wrong. And it's like, is magic gone from the world? No. Do you think reality is just what it seems? No. Do you think lamasu's are completely gone? No. And I just like that as a trend in late 90s White Wolf RPG books. This kind of suggests that we are in a world where this is the monster's last stand, that this is a book of options for what can be included and what can't be. I feel like the entire time there was this kind of arms akimbo, slightly annoyed Justin Achille in the background going, this doesn't fit with the World of Darkness thematically. Because there's no fewer than, I think, I counted them, 35 billion reminders that everything in here is optional. And we will get to my favorite reminder in the latter section. But 4 lines of text are occupied by the line, do, return, not, return, use, return, them. So if you don't want bygones running around the world, apparently you don't have to do it. And I appreciate Adam's observation that, like, yeah, Mage the Ascension is listed first. The degree to which some of these are an afterthought is almost impressive. When they're like, oh, by the way, like, oh crap, we told them we'd comment on this. But I think it does do a good job of saying, hey, this is how it could pop up in a vampire game. This is how it could pop up in a werewolf game. This is how it could pop up in a changeling game. And they're quick to say that chimerical creatures and their actual creature are not the same, and that the totem spirits of Werewolf the Apocalypse and the creatures aren't necessarily the same. So it does a reasonably good job of saying cosmologically how these creatures may or may not differ. It also mentions that they are going to take a mythological take on things, that when they talk about boars, they are not just talking about wild pigs, but kind of the set of cultural associations that go with them. And again, we will get more information on that. But this feels like a very, I will refer to it as a mage-forward book, in the same way that to me a good martini is a vodka-forward drink. Yes, there are other things in there, but boy howdy, can you taste the good stuff.
Well, I thought it was so interesting in the intro where they warn you that this is not a Dungeons & Dragons monster manual. It's like, okay, I gotta say I find that particularly amusing, since we get to this book after reading either the Sorcerer's Crusade core rulebook or the Mage the Ascension core rulebook, and by this time we are very much aware that we're not talking about Dungeons and Dragons. So it's kind of funny. It's like, there are bygones in this book, but you're not supposed to get a cleric, a thief, and a wizard and hack them to death with a sword as soon as you see them. Also, at the end of the introduction, they make it clear that when they give the descriptions for the bygones and the animals, they are taking it from the point of view of either Middle Ages Europe or Renaissance Europe. That's their current day as they discuss these creatures. And that's why in the bygone section towards the end of each write-up, there is a future fates section. And that the future fates is way forward in time to the modern age, late 20th, early 21st century. That's the future of future fates. But as we get into chapters 1 and 2, we're not going to give you so much a walkthrough, because chapters 1 and 2 are basically collections of interesting creatures. And so as we get to chapters 1 and 2, Terry and I are each going to share 3 that we thought were particularly interesting out of these chapters, and then give a few comments before we move on to the next chapter. I guess I'll start off with the bygones from this chapter, 3 that I found interesting. The entry for dragons was long, but so full of good material that it's my favorite from this chapter. It's interesting to note that even centuries ago, dragons needed quintessence, indicating that they are inherently magical creatures. When dragons die, they go to the Isle of Lamentations, located in the Sea of Dust, which probably exists in the Umbra. The description of the island and the Sea of Dust makes me want to take my players there. Dragons hoard treasure, but what sleepers don't know is their lairs are connected to other dragon lairs by ley lines, and in the penumbra of a dragon's lair, the treasures become arcane. A chest of gold becomes a stone with a diagram carved into it. A pile of tapestries becomes scrolls with runes that reveal mysteries. I want to know where dragons get their arcane secrets. Do they visit the umbral courts? Do they send assassins to bump off mages and take their stuff? There are possibilities here. Griffins are another good one. Fearsome beasts and known for guarding treasures, griffins are intelligent and sometimes like to discuss abstract topics with mages. A mage who wins a debate or shares a secret with a griffin can gain an ally. If a griffin were in trouble and wanted mage help, it would have valuable things to offer. They can form bonds with mages and become protectors, sometimes overprotective, as the write-up tells us. Lots of story ideas can start with griffins. For the unicorn, the writers went back to older legends. The illustrations show the typical horned horse from 80s fantasy posters, but the write-up gives us a creature with goat hooves and a body like a deer's. Rather than representing fragile purity, this unicorn represents fierce strength and primal purity. They defend wild crays, that is, nodes, and other ancient secrets in forests. Their horns are coveted by mages and sleeper nobility for the powers they hold, even when taken from the unicorn. The secrets they guard and the power of their horns give a storyteller motivation to use them in stories. So, Terry, what were your three favorite?
I have to repeat to you that the dragon entry was long and amazing. It talks about the celestial, terrestrial, and lesser dragons. It just keeps going. I appreciate that it worked so hard to kind of tie it to elements and kind of portray dragons in a lot of cases as almost cosmic forces, almost like a bygone equivalent of like Incarnate. And anytime the game world is made a little bit richer, I certainly appreciate it. So bang on those three choices. Yeah, we couldn't do it justice without basically just reading the entry. So the three I picked was, I started with The Rock, ROC, as opposed to Dwayne Johnson, which I would also appreciate a Sorcerer's Crusade write-up for. He probably merely had Strength 5 and Charisma 6 back then. This book includes a number of creatures that are from kind of the lore between Anatolia and Tibet, and that is often ignored in games, and that is a region I tend to find interesting. The Rock figures heavily in the lore of the Alibatine. These are absolutely massive birds who purportedly nest on Mount Kaf, the kind of place of reflection and wisdom that is the site of unity that the digital web may be now, or the digital web may have been built on top of. The West knows the largest example of this from the stories of Sinbad, as within 1001 Arabian Nights. They prize shiny things for their nest. One of their recurring themes in this book is that they will frequently have very intelligent creatures that kind of have this personality tick to them that I thought was kind of interesting. They are exceptionally shrewd negotiators. They will attack for food, but otherwise will flee unless they are defending their nest. They have the ability to sail across the Umbra. They are generally inscrutable, and they have a strength of 15. So they have the ability to pick up a female African bush elephant, but not the largest of the male African bush elephants. So if you're like me and you care about things like that and the feats of strength chart that's in every mage book, please consider that. No living person has ever found one of their nests. I just like the fact that they are tied in with the lore of a tradition and a place that is special. This section also starts with a quote from a Bottini master. Most of the animal entries were from a historical figure or from a work of literature, and I kind of like some of the fictional quotes sometimes. The next one I thought that was pretty fascinating was the Simurgh, which was this omniscient hermit Persian smart bird. It had orange metallic feathers, a person's face, 4 wings, a peacock's tail, and the claws of a vulture. It is the origin of the legend of various types of oracle, that it is the Simurgh in different guises. It has the ability to disguise itself, plus the natural shift in description that occurs when humans retell stories. It speaks all languages, including those that do not exist anymore, and lies in isolation. It gives you the opportunity to ask it a limited number of questions if you seek it out and act in good faith. It speaks in riddles, and it generally believes that humanity must find its own answers. I like this in that it is almost depicted as a primordial force of knowledge or truth or wisdom in the universe. And I like the idea that they are kind of a wisdom elemental, for lack of a better term. And I also like the idea that they're creatures that have kind of a total knowledge of the cosmos and only reveal what humans can actually deal with. That it is one of those things where you have a story where someone convinces the Simurgh to tell someone something humanity isn't ready for, and that person either then immediately walks through the calls or wraps themselves in paradox to become a marauder or something like that. I think the self-limitation is a fascinating angle on that, and any character that seeks a hidden or advanced knowledge would find that compelling, whether it be a hermetic that is convinced that they can withstand the power of its truth, of a Society of Ether member who thinks that it has scientific theories beyond the ken, or an NWO agent that's quite simply trying to snuff this thing out to gain total control over information, or that views it as a symbol because they only reveal that which humanity is ready for. The last one that I thought was kind of interesting was the Vodiani, which is a collection of drowned undead in the Russian-speaking world, that they are trapped underwater, that they are governed by the moon, that the sun is deadly to them, that their bodies will decay within hours of surfacing if exposed to light. They recruit from mortals, which is to say they kill mortals that swim at night. They are eternal. They have their own society and caste system that they communicate via a system of beautiful signs that have their own regional variants, that their ways of living kind of recapitulate the surface world, but they tend to be somewhat staid in that they are kind of immortal. I like when the World of Darkness introduces not just a creature, because it's relatively easy to introduce a Pegasus or the Manticore or a Sea Bishop or something like that. But in the case of the Vodiani, it is very clearly a case where they're saying, no, this isn't just a creature, this is a culture. So your characters may encounter a Vodiani city or encampment, or it may involve going into some sort of Umbra realm to see the totality of it. Or you may deal with the fact that they are being driven out and they feel they have a right to exist, except for the fact that it requires a regular supply of mortals, albeit dumb or foolhardy ones, to replenish their numbers. They are repositories of ancient knowledge in that they are unaging and kind of dimly remember their surface lives, but likely contain kind of the treasures of the deep in some way, shape, or form. And kind of the creatures of the Rus in terms of folklore, I think could have been better represented in this book, but I was glad that there were like any. So I'll certainly take it. And those were my three. What did you think about the chapter as a whole otherwise, Adam?
Well, I thought it was really weird to drop sphinxes in as a kind of dragon. I always remember reading descriptions of sphinxes that made them more mammalian, not reptiles. I don't see why they're connected with dragons. I thought it would have been a lot more fun to have them as a separate listing in here and give more on them. Also, they have a listing for, I think it's pronounced Feng Huang, the Chinese phoenix, or maybe in the World of Dark, the only phoenix. They're not clear about that. But it's this interesting sort of legendary super bird that appears when something very, very important occurs in the world. It has a fiery sort of birth or appearance when it comes, and then it basically, the write-up tells you you're supposed to have a dramatic moment, and then it flies off and is never seen again. I had, some ideas about how phoenixes might be used in games, but this write-up just seems to nullify all of them. They don't really talk. They don't have layers. They appear once and then they're gone forever. It just seems to limit the possibilities so much. I think more can be found by a person either reading Western legends of phoenixes or translated Chinese legends of Feng Huang and working with what you find there, because this seems to be, you could call it a one-trick pony. There's one emotionally impactful scene, and then it's gone forever, and you can't have any really meaningful communication with it anyways during that scene. But other than that, what were your other comments on Chapter 1?
The thing that kept coming up was the fact that this is very much steeped in the Western Christian interpretation of things. Now, normally someone may say that as just kind of to describe the milieu in which a text is being written, but here it very much focuses on the question of the mythic characteristics of a creature. How does that bear on the Christian notion of vice and virtue? I think it was done with a moderate touch in that it would talk frequently about how this creature is an embodiment of evil. The first entry on the cockatrice and the basilisk kind of opened with a bang, that the basilisk was this evil creature, but the rooster immune and noble would go out and slay it. But in one case, the rooster was prideful and resulted in being infected by the basilisk, and thus the cockatrice was born. So it is very much discussed in the framing of a natural embodiment of the importance of humility, more than there being weird ecological niches that are filled. Many of these entries were very dense word-wise, as in there are a lot of words on one page. We get a few pages in this book where there are almost 1,000 words on a page. Generally, in a World of Darkness book, that caps out at between 750 and 800. So this is small text, narrow margins, and few pictures on some pages. The padding around pictures is frequently quite narrow, whereas text will go right up to the image. So I think that some of the choices regarding, hey, this is actually a type of that, were attempts to say, we don't have the word count to get another entry. How can we jam it in? Or it could legitimately be the view of the author that, hey, this is actually a type of that. It could be a case where they're just saying why the World of Darkness is different. Or it could just be someone who maybe bunged up their research. I'm not entirely sure, but these are my attempts at kind of authorial apologetics, trying to figure out what's going on here. There was a relative paucity of entries for sub-Saharan Africa. It talks to a certain extent about Ethiopia, which at the time, or Namibia, which at the time would have extended to roughly the Sahara region and maybe a little bit of Eastern Africa, but anything further south than that isn't really included. I would have liked more information from the subcontinent and East Asia, but otherwise this gives us more representation of those regions and beliefs than we've otherwise gotten within Mage. It was rare that they went for the low-hanging fruit. Like, there were some easy entries, but usually they tried to make it interesting or a variant, or it brought up an angle that I was unfamiliar with, and I thought in general that was good. I thought this was going to be a boring bestiary, and so far it was not.
Okay, well, getting into Chapter 2, we have entries on real-world animals, but they try to add legends and ideas to make them more interesting, and they also give animal stats and suggestions on possible powers that these animals might have if a storyteller is really leaning into those legends and wants to make them a part of gameplay. Alligators get an awesome write-up here. They generate spontaneously from rotting logs. They punish sinners for ancient gods. They are inherently deceitful. This description makes me want to use them to terrorize mages foolhardy enough to leave Europe. Deer are fey creatures who naturally travel back and forth through the gauntlet. Chasing one at the right time can lead you to the Umbra or another world. Different gods and Umbroods send white or golden deer to carry messages or lead people to their fates. Deer, they're not just for dinner anymore. Horses are more common in the Renaissance than now. Rather than just moving people around and pulling carts, this write-up suggests ways to make them interesting in your games. Horses are sensitive to supernatural creatures of all stripes. Smart mages realize they can use a horse as a vampire or were-creature detector. Also, vampires breed their own horses using vampiric vitae. These horses are stronger, meaner, and they don't mind vampires. These special horses no doubt led to the legends of devil horses, nightmares, kelpies, etc. So I thought that was so cool to have an in-game explanation for where these legends of terrifying horses might come from. Yeah, those are the vampire horses, the ones that are really, really mean and big and strong, and you just don't want to get near. So those were my 3 choices of animals. Terry, how about yours?
I was pleased by the bat. I like the fact that the opening thing included the Muskogee legend, whereby there was a lacrosse game played between birds and beasts. The bat asked to play for the birds and was declined because it wasn't quite one, but ultimately they allowed it to. And the game of lacrosse went so long that it was not over until the night, and the bat won the game-winning point because it was able to see at night. I like the fact that they mentioned that within Chinese belief that its erratic flight is viewed as similar to the movement of the soul, that it is upward and erratic, that in the West it is considered a mockery of both birds and angels. It is considered a hard worker and a messenger, and it falls between the cracks in God's plans. It makes reference to the Kamazots, which are the kind of believed extinct pharaoh werebats who kind of take the place of the Koraks within the Garu world for South America. They annoy vampires who can hear them if they have heightened senses, and they find them disturbing because of their erratic movement and probably their association with blood-sucking. And I just like that vampires would be annoyed by bats when there is a very common association between the two. And just like having this vampire going, we don't actually like each other, blah, or something like that. Anytime there's an easy to drop in quirk into my game, I certainly appreciate it. The tiger is listed as being kind of the intelligent heart of the jungle. You are the flame of nature. They tell the story of the tiger that eats 3 sages. A group comes cross tiger bones, and the first says we can reconstruct it with science. The second says, no, I can reconstruct it with magic. The third says, no, I can reconstruct it with prayer. And the fourth says, yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to hide in this tree and watch you do it from a distance. Guess what? Only one of those 4 guys makes it to the end of the story without being eaten by a tiger. I tried to track this down, but it makes mention that tiger from tigress is also the Greek term for arrow. I like that they mention that Durga rode one, that he is that Durga rides a tiger as his traditional mount. One day, hopefully I'll be cool enough to have a black button-down shirt with a whole bunch of tigers on it, but that day is not yet today. I was also a big fan of the owl entry, in that owls have are another creature that have a very varied set of cultural associations. I did not know that the owl became associated with wisdom through its association with Athena, not the other way around. I have Pakistani friends who use a phrase that apparently literally translates to son of an owl to call someone an idiot. And in my experience, owls are generally idiots. They're deadly idiots, but they're idiots nonetheless. I did not know that they were associated with Lilith, the first woman and the mother of demons, which makes them instantly cooler. And they mentioned that in the New World represents vigilant darkness and the ever-presence of death. I also like that one of its powers is musical influence, which I am choosing to not interpret as its menacing hoot, but the idea that at some point in this era, almost like Jethro Tull, it would just pull out a flute and suddenly Aqualung would start playing, and that is how it would secure its prey. I also like the fact that they talk about it being a deadly hunter, and its bite does 1 die of damage. So steer clear. What did you think of the rest of this chapter?
I like the idea behind the chapter, and that is to not only give animal stats and some descriptions of what they do in the wild, but also to bring in legends and Renaissance-era beliefs about them to suggest interesting ways to use them in games. In execution, I don't think they quite stuck the landing, because some of these entries have great legends, others have almost none, or they start off with an oddball random story that you're not even sure how old this legend might be or where it came from, and then they go into just a description of the animal. And so some of them, they bring in some legendary from other parts of the globe, others stick just to Europe. And so it was kind of like a scattershot. Reading through this section, it's like you read about alligators, like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. And you read about another animal, it's like, or I think it was bear or something. It's like, yeah, they do this in the wild and they look like this. It's like, yeah, so. But I like the suggestions for making them more magical or more strange. If you look at modern-day World of Darkness games, then if you go into the Umbra, you can find this avatar representation of the super bear or the super deer or something like that. Of course, the werewolves with their culture, they believe that Gaia created a spirit to be the king of each animal, and that's their beliefs. Mages are free to see things differently. I think as far back as the Renaissance, you can still be at a point where these avatars, these super representations of each animal, can walk into the waking world and actually be encountered by players out in the wild. So I like that this chapter helps us to do that. Another thing that was a little odd for me was they give animal stats, but there are a lot of animal stats in the Sorcerer's Crusade core rulebook, and in 1998 there were a number of books out that gave us a lot of nice animal stats. I'm thinking, I think it was 2nd edition, they had the Mage Storyteller's Guide, a whole bunch of animal stats there. So I'm wondering how necessary that really was for storytellers at that point, but I guess it's good to have additional resources. But what were your thoughts on Chapter 2?
I thought I was going to hate this because normally I absolutely mock these sections because of the weird choices that are made regarding things like stats. Like the fact that a lion has willpower of 3, but a tiger has willpower of 2, but a snake has willpower of 7, unless it's on a big flat warm rock or something like that. And I'm just like, what is even going on here? The legendary attributes I very much liked because it creates kind of an echelon of creature between the mundane and the bygone. And mage doesn't directly have the notion of jagglings and gafflings, and if you use them, suddenly something needs to become spiritual or involve the Umbra, but here there is no such requirement. I think it helps you get into the mentality of Sorcerer's Crusade to talk about kind of the weird associations that occur with creatures, but I agree with Adam. Some of the write-ups were just like, yep, that's what a bear looks like. And you're like, that's all you're giving me. You're not going to talk about like even different types. No, bears, how about that? They represent the cycle of nature. They're all capable of reincarnating. Wait, what did you say? Yeah, so anyway. But other ones were absolutely amazing. When Adam and I were saying, hey, which ones did you pick? For the legendary creatures, we picked 3 completely different ones. But for the common beasts, Adam and I had both picked the alligator and the deer. And just the interpretations and write-ups they had of that were great. Alligator is either the dead as a god representing immortality, and the deer that to them the gauntlet is thin and they can run into literally any umbra. And I like the idea of taking this in weird modern directions, like a character could pursue a deer to get into the umbra, but that could include something like a John Deere tractor or a Chevy Impala. Yes, I understand that Impala are not a type of deer. You have to go further up cladistically, but similarly. Sometimes I just find the associations hilarious, like the deer is a symbol of meditation and peace. As someone who grew up in America's Northeast, they are the opposite of meditative and peaceful. They are constantly either running into something or staring at you and then bolting. So I wish there were a mechanic in the game to represent the fact that deer have a perception of 9, but frequently botch their perception rolls. We were like, why did that deer run away? He goes, I think it's because the deer saw a leaf. We are in a forest. Yeah, and he was uncomfortable with that. Or something like that. They are both a symbol of the power of resurrection, but they are also commonly themselves sacrificed. This was a surprisingly good section outside of, to me, I think the mundane mechanics of the animals. I loved the vampire horses. Just the fact that there are horses running around with a dot of fortitude, potence, and celerity. I like that war horses have an empathy of 3, which would make most war horses reasonably good therapists. But I like that that's only for war horses. So I like the idea that most therapists in middle-aged Europe are retired war horses. I like that the section included what the Garou view of them, what werewolves view, where they talk about how dogs and horses are considered to be lesser species, and that the Garou are suspicious of apes for being too similar to humans. So I really hope within the Garou nation there is like a horse liberation front that just kind of like frees horses. I don't know what happens after that, because a lot of times when people like free animals from zoos, it doesn't end very well. Like, what does it mean to free a dolphin? That really requires some advanced planning. But yeah, an unusually good animal section that was also a little bit spotty at times.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they, for every animal, they suggest legendary powers they might possess, except for the sheep. It says sheep, none. It's like, come on, they're sheep. I mean, seriously, guys, they're sheep. Yeah. But moving on to Chapter 3, let's resume our walk through the book. Terry, what can you give us?
Okay, so Chapter 3 is entitled The Beast Comes Alive, which I thought was going to be about vampires, but no, they're literally talking about beasts. It opens about how a talking animal can kill the mood or theme of a game of vampire, which is why you shouldn't play vampire, because if a game can't deal with a talking animal, I'd argue it's not really the world of darkness. And it walks you through character creation. One of the options you have is you can either be mundane, legendary, or kind of supernatural animals, and it guides you through this. And even more so than normal mage character creation, there is a wide range of power in terms of that creation. If one character is a frog and another one is a baby dragon, how the dink do you kind of even that out? It tells you to start by picking an elemental affinity, that most creatures merely have a nature but not a demeanor, but sophisticated animals do. It also mentions that animals are kind of weird, that they have odd predilections that seem alien to humans. We get a section that talks about seeing with animal senses, which reminded me of the one that we got in Gods and Monsters. So we get a bunch of new backgrounds. We go through a set of common character creation questions, like what do you do? What does your society and culture look like? Why do you interface with mortals? What do you want to get out of other creatures? What do you pursue? We get treasure as a new background, as well as years to indicate kind of how old you are and the amount of information that you just kind of have. It also talks about what do you consider etiquette to be. It then goes through a number of new attributes and abilities. We get new merits and flaws, and most of these seemed reasonably appropriate. As is always the case in World of Darkness, mechanically, there's some balance questions. So, for instance, to be very large, you have to pay extra points, and to be very small, you have to pay points. So if you want to have the might of a spider, that is going to require 10 character creation points. So if you want the benefits of moving slowly and being trivial to kill, that'll cost you 10 points, buddy. A number of the other ones also were needed to kind of back up what had been listed previously. The ability to sense the soul, which had amazing art because it kind of looked like the Grim Reaper was taking a bunch of wolves out before it went to bed because it just needed them to poop because it didn't want to have to get up in the middle of the night. The merits include having extra heads, the ability to summon elements of various types, being very calming, the ability to consume paradox, and at the high end, that is 20 points of Scourge a week. It also mentions that there are systems for characters being very, very old. And whenever I see that, I'm like, does that mean like all 7-century-old dragons are like have weird taste in music and are probably a little bit racist? I don't know. Kind of takes us through the character creation section. The rest of the chapter is then storyteller advice. And one of the things, again, as I had mentioned, it's like, hey, don't do this if you don't want to. That must be for the other game lines because we as mage players are quite used to this. But it has a section where it's like, Estes should not allow players to play animals until they prove they can roleplay it well. And I just picture a character, a player and a storyteller being like, you said you could roleplay a horse. You call that roleplaying a horse? You were roleplaying a pony at best. And he's like, so I can't continue playing my character? And the storyteller just says, nay. But it's a book that is seemingly obsessed with balancing play in what cannot be a balanced game, appropriate role-playing for things that are not people, and the necessity of being able to drop the mythic at the drop of a hat if it doesn't fit with the game, even though if you're playing a game as an animal, that is now the game you're playing. It's like talking about how possessing a void ship is unbalancing. The moment you have a void ship, you're now having a game about void ships. The moment you're a dragon, it's now a game about dragons in some way, shape, or form. The storyteller advice was fine. The systems were there. The hard thing was the nature of the entries for the individual creatures had a section of potential merits and flaws at the end of them. In some cases, the write-ups made mention of powers that were then not pointed to. Like it might say that, this creature can run into the Umbra, but umbral travel was not necessarily listed, and vice versa, that a power was listed as being possessed, but there was no like merit tied to it. The balance was very difficult. It would have been nice to have something about how to narratively balance, but that was kind of a game technology that was still a couple of years away at the time of this writing. But for what the book purports to want to do, I think it gives you most of what you need to do it. What did you think about Chapter 3?
Chapter 3 was interesting for me because it states very clearly that this chapter has resources for equipping people to make player characters that are bygones or animals. What I thought was interesting was I read through it. It's like, look at all these interesting merits, powers, etc. I think it's great for using for human player characters that are not mages, but are custos. They are humans who have powers that are not sphere magic, and it is a great resource for that. There are new skills in here, but these are very clearly pointed at animal player characters. If you have like a human custos, then these skills are just not appropriate. So the skills are very, very focused on that. But there are new backgrounds called treasure and years, and I think these would have been improved by having better rule systems or rules guidelines for how to interpret those. They're really fuzzy. Treasure is you have valuable treasure. How valuable? Well, it's valuable. Well, how valuable? Well, it goes from 1 to 5, so figure it out. It's like, okay, I guess. But there's also years. It's like, because you're older, you know more. It's like, well, how could I really use this? Well, you figure it out. It's like, well, okay, but you gave me a write-up in a rules chapter, so you're kind of supposed to at least help with that. The merits and flaws are, again, they are written for animal player characters, but in this case, I think they can add an interesting twist if used for human player characters, but of course you have to use them wisely. This chapter has a lot of resources, and I like it when the game designers give me a toolkit, because that means, hey, we trust you. You could use this really stupidly, or you could use it in really cool ways that we hadn't thought of. So, as long as you use it intelligently, here's the keys to the car, go nuts. So I like that kind of thinking. Special advantages are, again, designed for animal characters, but I think they work great for Kustos. Now, of course, some of these are not really going to look too well. For example, you could have multiple heads. It's like, okay, on a dragon, that's cool. On a human, that's just stupid. So again, if someone goes through the special advantages here and makes up a comic book superhero, then as a storyteller, you're supposed to turn it down and go, yeah, we're not playing superheroes here. So come on. Feast of Nettles is the ability for a familiar to basically eat Paradox, or Scourge in the case of Sorcerer's Crusade. Here, if you go in at max and put 6 character creation points onto Feast of Nettles, you can take out so much Scourge that it might actually unbalance a game. If one player character has Feast of Nettles at max, then the other players who are mages in the game might go, all right, we're going sphere crazy. We're going to do crazy wild stuff because we're bulletproof. It's like, okay, let's take a step back and think about how we're really going to work this one out. Again, it's a nice resource if you use it well. There are powers in here like wall crawling and webbing, which could make a really interesting Kustos touched by a spirit of spider. Or you could make an idiot playing Spider-Man. The advice at the end of the chapter is, I guess it was interesting. I didn't find it all that helpful. One of the points they really try to hammer is, as an animal, your senses other than vision are going to be very important to you. So it says, hey, ask your storyteller, what do I smell? Okay, from my point of view, I'm raising an 11-year-old child. I have detected some scents that if I describe them to my players would probably traumatize them. So the next time you're playing an animal and you think to yourself, hey, I could ask the storyteller, what do I smell? Think twice. Do you really want to know? Your storyteller might be ready for that one. That wraps up my basic thoughts on Chapter 3. So generally speaking, the book as a whole, what did you think, Terry?
I thought it was a good book. It was much better than I anticipated it being in a lot of cases. I wish that the framing fiction for a lot of the mythic creatures, a lot of the supernatural creatures, were quite long, where you would have almost a half-page story on Sally and the unicorn or something like that, and they were flavorful, but they, in many cases, were kind of repetitive. Mage finds creature, wants to kill creature, realizes it shouldn't kill creature, learns valuable lesson, was kind of a recurring motif that we got within this book. A lot of things had to do with purity and chastity and virtue and sexual crimes and so on, again, which was kind of an obsession seemingly of medieval Europe, or as presented in the book, but it gets kind of repetitive at some point. The art was fine. This is kind of what was necessary for illustrations. There were a bunch of cases, as Adam mentioned, with the unicorn thing, where it's like, they don't look like what you think they look like, but here's an illustration that's exactly what you look like. That's exactly what you expect based on what you already thought it looked like. Some of the illustrations were fun. Page 89 had a 6-headed snake eating something with no butt, which kind of raises some questions on how the digestive tract works. It was kind of big and messy. It would be hard to cross-reference through it. I would love an updated version of this. This is one of those things where so many things have been included in the World of Darkness and so many things could be used that there is so much space. I like the fact that in the World of Darkness, we have a bunch of different interpretations of things. You can have it as a bygone. You can have it as a spirit. You can have it's a paradox spirit. You can have it's a magical creation of some sort.
It's a chimerical being.
Yeah, it's a totem. I love that panoply. And the fact that it doesn't say, no, this is this. And it specifically says, no, these can all coexist. You can have a Kosian create something that looks like a unicorn. You can have the Pegasus that the Black Furies have as their umbral patron. And you can have this legendary spirit hippocampus or something like that. And I like that. I would love to see a modern example of this. When Adam and I were reading the Non-Sorcerer's Crusade, one of Adam's comments was on the urban legends things. This was meh. I would love to see a modern update of that. In fact, I think the companion episode that will go with this that I have yet to record, but I'm saying it out into the universe, so hopefully that will force me to do it, is Bygones, where are they now? Talking about how they could have changed over time. One of the most interesting things to me in Mage is the idea that these Sphinx has moved to the digital web? What other bygones have shifted? It raises to me a lot of questions about what happened in the intervening centuries. I would love to know where specific bygones possibly went, how they come back, do they suffer disembodiment? We get little hooks into the rest of the mage cosmology. What are the Jinn interactions with bygones and what do they think of them? So there's a lot of questions I have. Yeah, overall, I thought it was a big, dense book that moved over some things quickly, kind of went slow in other places, but it's a lot of, I think, really interesting ideas. I felt that there were certain areas of like creature type that were uncovered, that were not discussed, but I would have a hard time articulating it. There were a lot of wise creatures out there or otherwise things that were very hard to kill. So a little bit more variety in how creatures can be used in your story. But yeah, I like the panoply.
Definitely. This book encourages us to ask the question, what is a bygone? Is it a creature of long ago struggling to survive in a changed world? Or is it human imagination made real by the powers of the consensus? Perhaps they only exist in umbral realms and escaped to Earth, and that's where they became real. Perhaps mages created them. At the back of the chapter 1 about bygones, there's something called the wild beast. And it says, yeah, the Kosians from the Order of Reason, they just totally made these. They didn't exist before mages created them. And after mages created them, well, now they're real. So yeah, there's all different ways, and of course, as Terry said, you can mix them. Perhaps something walked out of the Umbra, and it was only in the High Umbra because people believed it into existence. But then you have the Harpies that were always real, and people encountered them, and the legends came from the actual Harpies that people encountered. And mix it up, make it interesting, keep your players guessing, which I think is one of the obligations of a storyteller.
Yeah,
or maybe that's a newer thing. It might be a difficulty that merits and special advantages from the back of the book show up in creature stats at the front of the book. I say this is a problem. Some people say, well, it's all in the same book. What's the problem? Well, a lot of these books are not read cover to cover. They are referenced by a storyteller prepping for a game. And so from that context, you might pull it off your shelf, look through. It's like, oh, griffins, cool. Okay, I'm going to have a griffin in my game. That'd make it for a great scene between A and B. And then it mentions some special advantage. You're like, what the heck is that? What is that? And you might forget that, that's in the back of the book. And so that might be a problem. If you are using the book more frequently, then of course you're going to be aware of that. Also, you don't have to use the special advantages, as they're called in this book, with bygones and different spirit creatures. You could just take the spirit gifts that they list in Sorcerer's Crusade and Mage the Ascension books. You could just use those. Those work fine as powers for bygones or familiars or whatever you want. So you don't have to use special advantages out of this book. I think they're fun, but some of them can get a little silly in your games. And as Terry said, the book is frequently warning you, hey, there's some wild stuff in here. It might be too wild for you. We warned you. Also, watch out for tatas. I almost lost an eye. There are girls with tatas. There are weird creatures with tatas. They're pointing out at random from different pages. So yeah, when this book came out in '98, and I grabbed it soon after it was released at the hobby shop in Spokane, Washington, and I saw this as second edition Ascension's Right Hand. Ascension's Right Hand was a mage book for first edition. It was saying, hey, why don't you have Kustos in your games? You could give them weird powers like this. I thought it was a fun book, but Terry and I reviewed that on Tomes of Magic. It did have its shortcomings. I really like using Bygone Bestiary as a updated Ascension's Right Hand. I used it with second edition mage when I was running a long online campaign, and so I took this chapter 3 for animal player characters, and I just said, no, I'm using this for human Kustos, and had a great time with it. Now, I had the awareness up front that I had to watch out for weird combinations, so one or two times a player came to me with basically a comic book superhero, and I said, no, we're not doing that. It changes the mood, the theme of this too much. Go back and try again. And so as long as you're aware of that, I really like the wild powers and merits in this book. Highly recommend it, and I used it quite a bit. It's my copy is pretty dog-eared from all the page flipping I did during character creation and game prep. But with that, was there an interesting quote from this book, Terry?
Oi, howdy, were there. One was the entry for the unicorn, and it said that unicorns communicate through a mixture of knickers, whinnies, and rudimentary telepathic images. Period. New line. All horned beasts possess an innate psychic ability to share simple visions with others, whether intelligent or primal. I like the idea that all deer are telepathic in the world of darkness. That's just something I was glad. I think one of my favorite things that's just kind of obvious, was an entry about I think it was the hippogriff that said, you've been a survivor since the day of your birth. Yes, by definitions, all creatures have successfully survived since the day of their birth. Another one was one of the earlier entries, and it says, in the beginning, it's true that you may have been a sewer rat and a effer of corpses, but these days you've learned the joys of sophistication. Yeah, that's a rags to riches story if ever I heard one. It also includes historical quotes, and this is one by Sophocles. If it were possible to hear sorrow by weeping and to raise the dead with tears, gold would be less prized than grief. I thought that was a good quote. So yeah, this was a panoply of pithy or terrible writing as you wish. So what are we reading next, Adam?
Only 125 pages and we can call it the Big Book of Stuff.
Yep.
Next is Infernalism, Path of Screams. Boy, that ought to be a fun one.
Yeah.
Everything you never wanted to know about really evil NPCs, but were forced to find out.
I think it's also notable for including a lot of grimoires or something like that, where it's like, well, not everyone wants to use the Nefandi in their game, but books. Kids these days love reading books about other books. Let's include a lot on that. I don't know if that's actually the case. This is the first time I'm cracking this, and this is why Sorcerer's Crusade is so fun.
Yeah, I read it, but it's been years, and so I only remember like one passage where a guy's saying, you know what, how I bound my leather-bound books, you know where I got the leather? That he tells you, it's like, I did want to know that. I did not want to know that.
Please say Hobby Lobby. Please say Hobby Lobby. Please say Hobby Lobby.
If you have something to say, please contact us at magethepodcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. Go ahead, folks. We can take it. Subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and other aggregators. If you like the show, others might like it too. And when you leave a positive review of us, it makes us easier to show up in their searches, and we would certainly appreciate it. You can follow us on Twitter at Mage the Podcast. We're also on the web at magethepodcast.com. You can listen to past episodes there and see the complete show notes that we've prepared for you. We have a YouTube channel now where you can find our episodes. There's a link in the show notes, but you can also search YouTube for Mage the Podcast. All lowercase, don't sweat the colon. You'll find us. This episode was assisted greatly by our executive producers. Terry, can you share the names of our executive producers so we can thank them?
I would be glad to. I'd like to say thank you to Oracle Buck Gregory, Oracle Christopher Phillips, Oracle Josh Hillerup, Oracle Jay Widener, Oracle Michaela, and Oracle the Crew of Erebus. I'd also like to thank Alex, Alexia, Anders S., Andrea Edelstein, Anon, Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbert, Blake Ryan, Boo, Boogers to the Six, Brad of the Blue, Bryce Perry, Chris B., Daniel Cuppen, Daniel Scribner, Dan Svensson, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Derek Semsick, Fraggerock, Gargle Lenoir, George Lara, Guy Conan Stewart, Ia Bull, Jason Kennedy, Jason Vines, Jason W. Briggs, Jeff Bryn, Jenna F., John Magnuson, Jolyn Andes, Joshua Heath, Kathleen Halperin, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Proyle, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Morgan Aron, Nathan Weaver, Nip Barrow, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klaymanov, Oliver Schindler, Patrick Mulder, Patrick McNamara, Puka G, Rachel Grace, Ralph Scheinhammer, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Rob H, Ryan Kim D, Samuel Tobin, Stephen Carton, Thrice Great, William Connolly, William Martin, and Zach Rules. Thank you so much for helping this happen and for now requiring me to file a small piece of documentation with the American government.
If you would like to become an executive producer for Mage the Podcast, it would help us keep producing episodes like this one. You would also become a part of our own council to discuss upcoming projects. The link in the show notes will get you started. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and until next time, truth until paradox, baby.
Don't be seduced by any boys or sows out there, and remember that deers are skittish, but they can lead you into the Umbra. Now go change reality. Bye.